On the morning of my birthday, I woke up to an incredibly sweet surprise. A cupcake with a little slip of paper poking out of its delicious frosting. I immediately grinned, imagining my mom or dad sneaking in while I was asleep to place the delicacy. After rubbing the last bits of sleep out of my eyes, I sat in bed and swung my legs off while grabbing the cupcake off my bedside table. I also noticed a journal next to it with my name engraved on the cover in big gold letters. But the cupcake remained in control of my sleepy brain's attention. I took a quick swipe at the icing and sucked it off my finger before grabbing the paper shoved in it. I was amused upon opening it when I read what it said. Happy 18th birthday, Mac. A special gift. You've been given a list as a way to fulfill all of your birthday wishes. Just write down all of the things you want, and they will find their way to you throughout the week following your birthday. I remember you saying you needed a journal, so I took the liberty of filling in one of the blanks with that. Happy wishing. Below this explanation were 4 empty blanks, to be filled in with whatever I could possibly want. I felt the biggest smile stretch across my face, excited at how awesome this was going to be. My parents had really thought of an incredibly awesome gift idea, and I couldn't wait to thank them. As I gobbled down the cupcake and took a peek at the monogrammed journal they had gotten me, sliding my fingers around the golden letters of my name on the cover, I thought about what I wanted, writing it down as ideas popped into my head. Here's what I wrote. -1, of course. Journal. 2. A new phone. 3. A German Shepherd puppy. 4. A new watch. 5. Mom's chocolate cake. Whenever I headed downstairs, they were already in the kitchen chit-chatting over coffee. As my mom saw me coming down the stairs, she quickly dashed somewhere in the den, bringing back a present and placing it before me. I'm shocked you didn't find it this year, honestly, she joked while beaming at me, waiting for me to open it. You've managed to at least sneak a peek every year since you were 5. I guess your father is to blame for some of those years though. She pretended to scowl at him, but couldn't keep up the act with how happy she was. My dad chuckled, pretending to shield himself from my mom's look with his coffee cup. Go on ahead and open it, buddy, he told me. I opened it to find a journal. It didn't have my name monogrammed on it or anything, but it was still pretty good quality. I love it, but I was confused on why they would get me 2 journals. Why did you get me 2? I asked. 2 what? My mom asked with a confused look on her face. Journals. You got me the other one with my name on it, I replied. I knew my mom didn't have the best memory, but she had never forgotten something like this before. She always forgot little stuff, like things at the grocery store, or to water her plants. She wouldn't forget she bought me a present, and buy another one nearly just like it. I didn't get you another journal, replied my mom. She glanced at my dad and asked, did you get him one and not tell me? My dad shook his head, clearly also confused. No, I told you I couldn't handle his gift this year, remember? I showed them the journal, the note, and the cupcake wrapper, which they still continued to deny placing. Honestly, at that moment in time, I thought they were pranking me, and I'm sure in their minds, they thought I was pranking them, or that maybe one of my friends was pranking us. Either way, it didn't seem like a huge deal at the time, especially after they revealed my biggest gift. They led me outside blindfolded to the driveway. After they took the blindfold off, I was shocked to see a white Nissan Altima with a big red bow on its hood, and I grinned from ear to ear, completely forgetting the rest of this morning's previous events. Day 2. For dinner tonight, my parents had decided to take me out to eat as another birthday gift. We had all discussed how strange the cupcake and the letter had been, but honestly, I'm not sure they entirely believed me about the incident. I'm pretty sure they thought I was pranking them, just as much as I initially thought they were pranking me. Even after I told them about the puppy, they still seemed a little skeptical, but I could tell they didn't want me to think they didn't trust me, on the off chance that I actually was telling the truth. I had trouble believing myself too, really, considering I got rid of the evidence of the cupcake fairly quickly. It was pretty delicious, and it was just a very strange thing to happen. Just before we made it inside the restaurant, my parents saw a friend of theirs who was leaving. They stopped to chit-chat, and while they were in the middle of that conversation, I wandered off a bit down the sidewalk, admiring the bushes of red roses beside the restaurant windows. Their fragrance drifted through the cool breeze, calming my nerves a bit. As I glanced down the alley beside the restaurant, I noticed they had a beautiful mural covering the brick wall. A mural of a sunset overlooking an ocean, with a beautiful island in the background. I walked closer to admire it, and to get a peek at what the little figures on the sandy beach before the ocean were doing. As I neared the wall, I noticed that it was tiny people, and they had been added fairly recently. I could see the fresh paint shining as the sun beamed down on it. And then, I noticed the party hats on their heads and the balloons in their hands, all surrounding a tiny person holding a cake. 18 tiny candles stuck out of the cake, lit up and waiting for their purpose. The actual cake had an arrow pointing on it, pointed towards the right. The arrow aimed towards what I assumed was the back alley of the restaurant, after I realized there was nothing on the painting that it could be directed at. The whole scene left me feeling giddy, surrounded by the partygoers. The lucky birthday person seemed so happy, and they didn't seem to have any other care in the world besides blowing out the candles on their cake. I wondered if that same fate awaited me in the restaurant. Would my parents surprise me with a cake full of candles, ready for me to make a wish? Is that how they surprised me with another gift? Finally admitting it was them that left that mysterious list? I felt that painting was a sign for me, but I knew there wasn't a way to be sure without following the arrow. I felt my giddiness fade a bit as confusion took over, however. Why would my parents put another surprise in the alley behind this restaurant? Suddenly, appearing a bit ominous, the possibilities behind the arrow seemed dire, a stark contrast to the brightly colored birthday cake it sat upon. It seemed strange, but the idea that my parents were still behind the prank is what made my legs move in the direction that the arrow aimed for. I realized my judgment was incredibly flawed when I saw the puddle of red on the pavement, spreading gradually to its grassy cracks. I could still hear my parents' conversation carry on, them laughing along to some joke someone had made, and my body screamed for me to become a part of that conversation that only moments before had felt like a bore to me. Splayed out on the pavement was a dead body, and whoever it was had unluckily had her head smashed in until her face was unrecognizable. Bits of her brain and bone surrounded her head, mixing with the blood to form a screwed up halo. Her right hand was chopped clean off, almost fascinating with how perfect the amputation seemed to be. Beside the girl's body and firmly latched in her only remaining hand was a shopping bag from a very popular electronics store, and the sight of it made my stomach churn. I tried to scream for help, or just scream at all, but it was like every muscle in my body had suddenly refused to operate. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the gruesome and gory scene, no matter how hard I tried. The birthday list flashed into my head as I glanced at the bag, picturing a new phone. I tried to shut down that thought, but I swear I saw the girl's fingers flexing towards the bag, like her corpse was wanting me to open it. Just as I jerked backwards from the corpse, so hard that I lost my balance and fell to the ground, a slip of paper flew out of the shopping bag and landed at my feet. The wind, still gently blowing it, made it seem like it was nudging my foot, and my curiosity got the best of me. I unfolded the crumpled up paper and realized it was a receipt for a new phone in the exact brand I wanted. Once again, "Happy birthday, Mac" was written at the top. I felt my heart skip a beat. I had no idea who this girl was, so there was no way she could have bought this phone for me. Someone was clearly screwing with me, but were they seriously demented enough to stalk someone and kill them just for me to have a phone? My eyes flashed to the empty space where her hand should be, and a horrific image flashed through my mind at what it was taken for. That thought slowly trickled out of my mind as I saw black spots dancing around my vision, and I felt very dizzy. I slumped to the ground before I even realized what was happening, blacking out with the crumpled up receipt still in my clutch. Day 3. Being interviewed by the cops is an absolutely horrible birthday present, but they questioned me about every single facet of my life and the current events of my ongoing birthday week before turning me loose. I didn't get to have my birthday meal, which, honestly, wasn't the worst part of that day. The worst part was barely being able to sleep, and whenever I could fall asleep, I would wake up screaming after having dreams of watching her head get bashed in, her hand being sawed off, and a receipt being removed and replaced in the shopping bag with her murderer's strange calling card. A calling card that had entirely everything to do with me, which is something I'm sure the police will have trouble completely letting go of, even though I did absolutely nothing to that girl. Even with all of this happening, I sadly still had to go to school. For a moment, I wished I had written no school for my birthday week on the list, but then I pictured scenes of my school being blown up or a shooting happening, both making me shudder and feel thankful that I hadn't been that selfish. My first ride to school in my new car would have been rather enjoyable thanks to how beautiful the weather was today, but the looming threat of another gift being given to me at any moment made it nearly impossible not to be on edge. It felt like the world knew what was going on and was trying to cheer me up, but the gift giver had made this birthday one full of nervous looks over my shoulder, checks of everyone around me's handwriting, and the fear that I might end up the next dead body. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. You know those scenes in movies that are so absolutely perfect that the characters feel suspicious of their surroundings? They want to call bull on everything, but they aren't sure if they should trust their instincts or not. That is 100% how I felt, and that is exactly how this drive to school felt. I was just waiting for something to go wrong, and then, like clockwork, I saw something on the side of the road that made me pause my anti-joyride to take a look. As I pulled over and climbed out of my car, I felt goosebumps prickle my arms. The cool breeze blowing through the trees surrounding the street just felt a little too chilly. What initially caught my eye about the object was something red attached to it. As I walked towards it, I quickly realized that it was actually a red ribbon, and that it was wrapped around something fuzzy. I paused in my tracks at this sight, alarm bells immediately going off in my head, even though I knew looking wouldn't lead to anything good, and even though the alarm bells just kept on ringing and ringing in my head, something else called me towards the object. I had to see what it was, but as I crept even closer to the object, my heart dropped into my stomach before shattering into a million pieces. It was a puppy, specifically a German Shepherd, that looked like it was a couple months old before its tragic death. The poor thing looked like it had been run over, and the red ribbon was wrapped tightly around its neck. That wasn't the worst part though. The worst part that made me feel like someone had a scrap of my broken heart and stabbed me with it was the tag attached to the bow that simply read, "Happy birthday, Mac," and nothing more. I looked around through the trees, wondering if whoever had done this, whoever was tormenting me, was somewhere out there, watching. I didn't see anyone. I took a picture of the puppy before moving it out of the road and snatching the tag off the ribbon, making sure it had no connection to me. I felt bad just leaving it there, but I had no idea what to do with it, and I didn't want to be too late to school. I couldn't believe that I had ever thought this was my parents or my friends pranking me, or that this was even a prank to begin with. They could never do something this insane and screwed up. But who could? And what did they want with me? Day 4. Whenever he wakes up in the morning, my dad's morning routine is to grab the newspaper that had been thrown on the front porch and read it while sipping a cup of coffee. This morning, I ended up being included in that routine. Whenever he gently shook me away, my eyes opened to the sight of him sitting on the edge of my bed with a concerned look on his face and a box in his lap wrapped in birthday-themed wrapping paper and a decorative bow on top. My parents thought it was best for me to take the present to one of the detectives working on the murder case I involuntarily became a part of, and I, of course, agreed immediately to that idea. It was a few days before they got back to us, but there wasn't a single moment in those utterly exhausting days that I didn't think about what was in that box. A million different ideas of what it could be zoomed through my head at 100 miles per hour, consistently giving me a pounding headache. I knew if it was something from that list, and considering recent events, it most likely was. It would have been the watch. Images of her severed hand popped into my head every time I remembered this, making it throb even more. And it was hard to shut those thoughts out. Every time the house phone rang, I would practically torpedo across the house, waiting for all of the painful questions in my head to be answered, hoping for some relief, random calls from distant family, or family friends checking up on us. With all that's going on, it annoyed me to high heavens. But finally, after those few agonizing days, they were on the other end of the phone with answers. I allowed myself hope for a moment that it wasn't what I thought it was, that my dark thoughts were just a product of my horrific flashbacks and not the truth. That hope was crushed whenever the detective explained the exact watch that I had screenshotted from a website a few months ago, still on my phone and also apparently on the girl's severed wrist. I ran to the bathroom and vomited straight away whenever my parents begrudgingly gave me that information. Picturing the box, delicately and precisely wrapped and decorated with the bow, made my headache grow into a full-on migraine. It throbbed to the beat of my racing heart, and I felt like I was going to hyperventilate. I locked myself in the bathroom, away from my parents. My mom knocked on the door for a few minutes, and I could hear the sadness and worry in her voice. I needed to be alone though, so I didn't respond. I just laid limply on the cold tiled floor, trying to focus on not hurling again, and eventually, I heard my dad coax her away from the door to give me space. The detectives called me in to be questioned again, so I had to suffer through the same questions of whether or not I knew anyone who could have done this. Have I noticed anyone seemingly stalking me before? Is there anyone who might hate me? Etc. The questions ended with dead ends just like they did the first time they were asked, and I felt more defeated than I had been the first time, becoming sure that the cops had no leads and no idea of who was tormenting me. Was this what the gift giver wanted? To torment me until I was completely destroyed? If so, they were getting pretty damn close. Day 5. As all the horror stories go, the person within them goes through periods where they believe life can't possibly get worse, until it does. Their lives become a steadily increasing hell show of their worst nightmares coming to life. And they are just along for the ride, being tossed and turned, thrown and turned through hellish experiences until they truly get to their own personal hell. Torture is a gradual thing in these stories, and I wasn't really fond of the fact of it being forced upon me. I stupidly thought it couldn't get worse. And then it did. I had reached my personal hell that had now become my life. My parents like to go for drives sometimes, windows down, and music that they grew up with blasting through the car speakers. I used to go with them all the time when I was little, and watching them have their own little mini concerts was the most hilarious and fun thing for me. I hadn't went in years, telling them repeatedly that I was too grown up for that. But after the week I had had, I gladly hopped in the car with them whenever they invited me this time. As the car glided down the road, I realized how stupid I had been for missing out on this for so many years. I never realized how much I had distanced myself from my parents. Everything was fine as we drove down our street, admiring the trees in the last glowing embers of the sunlight. The sky was a beautiful mixture of oranges, yellows, and pinks, like an oil painting in the sky. The wind whipped through our hair and smelt of fresh cut grass. Wrapped up in this peaceful moment, I felt some of the grips of my headache being relinquished to the air, calming me more than I had been since the whole encounter started. I allowed myself to be distracted, hopeful even, and that's not a good thing to be in a horror story. There is no room for hope in those, at least not in mine, and I was stupid to think there was. But I was enjoying those few blissful moments until I heard my parents stop singing. I thought maybe they were just changing the song, as the current one had stopped blasting out of the speakers. But then, I heard hushed whispering, the kind they did when they were arguing and didn't want me to know. "What do you mean?" snapped my mom. I could tell that she was aggravated, but I also saw a flicker of something else. Fear, maybe? "The car isn't slowing down," responded my dad, clearly just as aggravated. "I have the brake all the way to the floor, but it isn't slowing down." My parents stared at each other, clearly in shock of what that might mean, but we didn't get to realize it as a family, because suddenly, and all at once, we realized the intersection was coming in hot. There was a lot of screaming, a lot of cursing, a lot of honking horns, and a lot of my dad slamming his hands on the steering wheel in anger before we slammed into the car crossing the intersection. I was instantly knocked forward upon impact, slamming into the console and the shifter, with enough force to knock the wind out of me and black me out. I woke up in the hospital, apparently after a few surgeries. They told me the brake line had been cut, and that is what caused the accident. We ran straight into the other car, thanks to ours being unable to stop at the stop sign. My parents died upon impact, and I made it out with shattered kneecaps and a broken pelvis, a concussion, and severe bruising. They said I had been very lucky to survive, and survive without being paralyzed or having brain or nerve damage. But I felt very far from lucky. After the accident, I barely wanted to live. I sat wallowing away in my bed most days, completely convinced that I had nothing else to live for. I knew there was one last wish that hadn't been given yet, but there was no room for it to occupy my mind, thanks to everything else taking over it. My life had become miserable, all because of a stupid list of 5 items. 5 items I thought were a completely innocent prank at first. What even was the point of the list anyways? Why was it sent to me, of all people? Why was I chosen to be tortured? Every day, my physical therapist would come and basically beg me to get up and try to get better, try to exercise my limbs, but I couldn't find the motivation for the longest. Eventually, he convinced me by reminding me my parents wouldn't want me to give up, and I knew they wouldn't. It took me a while, but I slowly got better. I still couldn't find the motivation to take care of myself, completely neglecting myself hygiene-wise, besides when nurses gave me bed baths because they pitied me. I couldn't even force myself to eat, so I wasted away like the shell of a human that I was, which didn't help physical therapy either, despite my unwillingness and sometimes even downright repulsion to eat. A wonderful nurse named Lily tried her absolute best to get me to. She brought every meal they served to me, uncovered the tray to try and entice me, and even offered to hand feed me. On one particular day, she just happened to mention an item on that day's lunch menu that made my heart drop into my stomach. "They're serving chocolate cake for lunch as dessert today, Mac," she said as she opened up my breakfast. She didn't notice the look of panic mixed with disgust on my face. I found myself completely unable to use my words at that moment, not because of my inability to gain motivation for any simple task, but because of fear. I feared that chocolate cake with every fiber of my being. Even still, like the always dependable and delightful person that she is, Lily brought me lunch today with a supposedly delicious slice of chocolate cake. I didn't dare to put it in my mouth, so I didn't know if she knew about it or not. I'm not sure, but there was a note slipped under the plate that my slice of cake was on. She told the detectives on my case that she didn't know about it, but I find it so hard to trust people nowadays, even though she never had given me a reason to doubt her before. The writing on the note said, "I know it's not your mom's, but that would be pretty impossible to get at this point. Happy birthday, Mac." Lily was incredibly shocked whenever I burst into tears, and she couldn't really do much to console me. She still attempted for about 10 minutes, which is all she could manage with all her other patients, but I was still grateful for her trying to help. As I'm writing this, it's about 3 years since my parents died. I've tried for all 3 of those years to find out who they were, but the cops said they didn't have enough evidence to pinpoint who it was, considering all they had was the person's handwriting. They even did an investigation on Lily, but never found anything from that route either. The only thing that they could figure out about the girl that the giver murdered was that the last place she was seen was the electronics store where she bought the phone, and the workers there said that she acted as if everything was okay. She didn't have anyone with her, and no one was following her when she left, from what they could tell. After I had finally gotten released from the hospital, for a while I dreaded returning to my empty home, but after spending more than enough money on hotels, it was the only place I could go. My parents' lawyer had called me to let me know that I was given everything according to their will, which was a minor plus to my personal hell. I still had a bit of debt to pay off at the hospital though, but at least I wasn't homeless. It didn't sit right with me that the gift giver knew where I lived, but I wasn't financially stable enough to move clearly. Even if I was, who knew if they would find me again? Since it's been 3 years, I'm just now getting back into the swing of things, figuring out how to handle life without my parents around. I hadn't had any more notes sent to me by the gift giver, so I'm finally starting to accept that it might be over. Friends I've made along the way have been my biggest support. It's my 21st birthday, another milestone in my life, a brand new beginning. At least, that's what I was hoping for when I woke up this morning. I woke up feeling refreshed and excited for my birthday plans I had made. All of those plans, my happiness, and my hope for the future came crashing down in a mere moment. Once again, reminding me that I am still and always will be in my own personal horror story. And in that moment, that painfully terrifying moment, I opened my eyes to a cupcake on my nightstand, just like I had seen in my nightmares for years now, in the same spot, with a slip of paper poking out of its icing. The nightmares of this one haunting image were just now beginning to subside. But here it was, once again. This cupcake was chocolate with crimson red frosting, reminding me of the blood surrounding the girl's smashed-in head. And the slip of paper contained one single line: ready to make some more wishes.